Hi, this is Priyanka and I welcome you all to Srijan Wednesday webinars. For those who are attending for the first time, this is a community initiative by Srijan Technologies. As a part of this initiative, we host webinars every alternate Wednesday. We invite speakers from different domains who talk on subjects like front-end technologies, UI UX, mobile apps, media, entrepreneurship, digital marketing, and many more. In our today's webinar, we'll discuss the architectures that you need to put in place to enable data analysis and what open source tools you can use to harness your current data assets in the first 40 minutes. I would request all participants to please type in any questions that you have during the webinar and we'll take them up in the last 15 minutes of the session. I would now like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar. We have with us Youngjin Kim. Youngjin is the founder and managing director of Infinos, an open source technology consulting company based in Chicago. Infinos specializes in providing data management solutions to large nonprofits and the government sector. Youngjin was a mentor at the Eric and Wendy Schmidt Data Science for Social Good Summer Fellowship at the University of Chicago, where he trained data scientists to solve real-world data problems for nonprofit organizations. Youngjin has also co-founded another company called Data Cognito, which is a company of data scientists and consultants that helps businesses and large organizations with data strategy and data architectures to enable them analyze their data for strategic, actionable insights. So without taking up any more time, I think we should get started. Youngjin, over to you.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. We're going to dive right into the talk. What we'll be covering today are some of the common data pain points that nonprofits and NGOs are facing in their day-to-day data management. We'll also cover how those data management practices can lead to obstacles for data analysis down the road. And we're going to motivate the sort of background idea of why we might want to do data analysis rather than focus a lot on the how. I think a lot of organizations walk into this arena and immediately ask for how, which products, and we'll kind of flip that on its head. We'll also show most NGOs and nonprofits actually have more data than they actually think, so we'll do some data inventory and show how a top-down approach of getting to a data analysis pipeline can actually sometimes lead to direct failure, and we'll show ways of actually doing this more in an incremental agile fashion where data analysis is done from the ground up. We'll discuss some useful data architectures which allow you to kind of get started right away rather than waiting for 3 years in a large project to be completed. We'll look at some open source tools that allow you to build these data pipelines, and then we'll have some questions at the very end. So a lot of you have probably heard this quote, which is data is the new oil of the digital economy, and the idea there is that data is ubiquitous, it's lightweight, it's very cheap to store, it can be mined and refined, and value can be created by actually taking it, extracting it, refining it, and then also exploiting it or create insights based out of that. It's a very top-down sort of mechanistic view of data, and I'll show that this works in business really well. In nonprofits, it's probably a little bit harder to get to this. The reality is that if data is the new oil, then most NPOs and NGOs are really doing it in a manual way, and it's very labor intensive, not high yield, and the refining of the data usually doesn't get done, so we're kind of stuck with just aggregates, snapshots, maybe dashboard views at the most, but not really deep insights that can be operationalized. And that's sort of the nature of nonprofit organizations, is that getting buy-in across all departments and amongst all stakeholders is sometimes really difficult. as well as staff training and retaining that institutional knowledge is a lot harder than in businesses. So what are some of these data battles that nonprofits and NGOs have to face? Well, a lot of the data is collected ad hoc using different systems, sometimes systems that are non-uniform, so there might be a Google form that's used to collect data here. Telephone conversations are recorded on Post-it notes or on paper files. There's some web forms that are available for website visitors, but those never make it into a CRM system. So the comments by users are not really logged with the actual context that they're referring to. All kinds of email marketing, outgoing email marketing, and newsletters could be on a totally separate system, so emails are duplicated across databases. And then managing data in each of those data repositories is time-consuming. The data itself is spread out, and it's really hard to run reporting, so it's inefficient. There's also a real difficulty in tracking each staff's interaction with clients over the long time frame. And then organizations generally have a lot of turnover, so institutional knowledge gets lost. Volunteers need to be retrained a lot of times. And then clients come in and go, so donors might contribute over a period of time but then drop off. It's usually not possible for, say, donors to update their own information, so because it's not integrated with the CRM or it's not integrated with the front-facing website, so as a result, contact information goes stale very quickly, and then it's really hard to reach out to these people again. Then, because we're using different types of tools, there are linkages missing, so it's not quite clear whether the John Smith in the CRM refers to the same John Smith that's in the email correspondence to a case manager, or is the same John Smith that's in an email marketing campaign newsletter. So that becomes a huge problem. And then a lot of organizations run their operations as a hub and spoke model, so you might have local entities that are doing on-the-ground work, great work with clients day to day, but then need to aggregate some of this information up to a national entity that then does reporting and make sure that there's funding in place. And that data transfer is generally very painful. Sometimes it doesn't exist, or if it exists, it's only done quarterly or annually for just reporting purposes that are mandatory, not necessarily to improve operations, which makes it really hard to get an overview of what's happening on the ground from the national office. And here's sort of a typical layout of what a nonprofit will track when it comes to data. Data is very siloed. You might have program data that's spread over different offices on different spreadsheets, never really synced up. I think more organizations are getting savvier about this and using technologies like Dropbox to share a central location, but it's still spread across spreadsheets, so you can't run a SQL query to get the data consolidated. The data entry in spreadsheets tends to be ad hoc, and so as a result, there's not a lot of data cleaning routines or safety measures for quality assurance built in. You might have a contact database. If you're a little more advanced, you probably have a CRM, but then the CRM itself might be proprietary and doesn't have good APIs, or integration is really expensive, so it doesn't really talk to the donor fundraising software, which is a separate entity, which might be just a client server instead of a web-based model. You might have a completely separate proprietary ticketing system that sells, say, millions of tickets to a festival event or annual conference that happens, but then the ticketing system can only provide you with a data dump, which then you have to painstakingly import into the CRM or into the donor fundraising software at some point, because they're considered monetary contributions. And then you have web and email marketing, which tends to be the most ad hoc because now you have a lot of free systems that allow nonprofits to spin up a site or spin up a marketing campaign for free when they're still small, but as they're growing, it becomes expensive or unwieldy, and then the data from those systems really is locked in and doesn't talk to any of the other different silos. So given that you have data possibly spread around 4 different databases and spreadsheets, it's then impossible to actually do any analysis on this data from the outset. And that's due to the weak data flows. And we'll revisit how we can improve data flows in a more ideal scenario later on. So as we saw, operational data stores, ODSs, generally have, without the proper governance structure or regulations, no data flow across the systems. And generally the biggest piece that's missing, the sort of Rosetta Stone of data analysis that's missing in order to unlock this data trove, are the missing integrations, which would then eventually lead to a unified database of record. Without a database of record, you have duplication across all the systems, and you can't run any analysis. There tends to be then, commensurate with that, also a lack of data governance and data management best practices across the organization. Since nobody's actually ever asked the question of how do we best make use of this data and what are we trying to do with it, data cleanliness and data hygiene is generally a last sort of, it's a question that's never really asked, because if you can't aggregate it up, then you never see the mess, and as a result you never end up cleaning it. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg problem. And then a lot of times we have top-down mandated ad hoc technical stopgaps. Sometimes a ticketing system is just needed. It needs to be installed on the fly because a big conference is coming up or the old system went end of life. And if that's not done strategically, what ends up happening is a new proprietary system will then be put online. But then it never really talks to or integrates, and then API considerations of data interchange between that new system and existing systems is just completely ignored until a later point in time, at which point you already have critical, mission-critical data in the new system, and then it becomes extremely hard for that to be extracted out or integrated with the other stores. A top-down approach always favors the how and not why. And what I mean by that is usually leaders are bombarded by marketers as well as product companies about the how, and the latest and greatest fashionable how answers are the ones that get all the press. So buzzwords like data lake, which is now completely replacing the stodgy old enterprise data warehouse, real-time data streaming and big data processing on Hadoop and Spark is the topic du jour, and then predictive analytics platforms are also considered extremely fashionable. And then we have visualization platforms that are drag and drop and supposedly self-service that allow you to do create great visualizations without any programming interface at all, with just a slick UI. And everybody, of course, has to have a BI platform that enables for A/B testing and hypothesis testing. So if we kind of flip that on its head, which I encourage you to do as a nonprofit leader, is to make sure to avoid what I call the cargo cult data science. And by cargo cult, I'm referring to this idea that you don't necessarily ever want to start with the how, but really ask the why. Well, why are we trying to do data analysis in the first place? How are those insights that we would gain from the data analysis applied back to the operations? And and not necessarily go just through the motions of putting together a data platform, which then the assumption is that it'll just magically work by going through the motions of it. So cargo cult refers to something that's happened in French Polynesia, where during World War II, the Americans ended up using a lot of these islands as bases for supply chain logistics to the Pacific War efforts. And they would land, drop off a bunch of cargo, and that cargo would then be, used to, have refueling stations for planes and other things. And the natives that were living on those islands, then when the U.S. Military moved out and the Allies moved out, were missing the cargo, which entailed riches, new food items, luxury things that they had never encountered before. These are Aboriginal or very cultures that hadn't developed cargo as a concept, that then started building planes out of wood and thatching and natural materials that they found in their environment, in hopes that if they built something that looked similar to a plane or a runway or a radio tower, that then the cargo would come back sort of as an incantation of wealth, so to speak. And I think what's important to note is just because something looks like an effort that's going towards the goal, if the motivation or the reasoning behind it is flawed, then it's just impossible to get to that result. All right, so there are a couple of analogies that I want to draw between how you want to approach data refinement as well as data analysis in general. There's a very good analogy they can draw between building a pipeline to say what would happen in food preparation. Rather than building a $100,000 kitchen and buying $200,000 worth of equipment and hiring $100,000 worth of cooks and prep chefs on a monthly basis to start making a dish, it's much more advisable and then start a full professional kitchen, which is what everybody is talking about in the data science world. It's really good to just start out with why, like what kind of dish are we trying to make, what kind of actionable insights are we trying to create, and then work backwards from there. What are some of the ingredients that we need? What are some of the ingredients we currently have as raw materials, data that's sitting in our organization that we can utilize? Just actually look into the refrigerator and see what you have in your kitchen before you go out into the marketplace and buy the other data assets that you might need in order to complete the dish. Sometimes not even add the ingredients that you think would be good, but just start out with what you currently have and do it in your kitchen in a small scale just to see how it tastes. Explore the recipe, tweak it, and then refine it over time so that by the time it becomes a really good recipe, consider then maybe opening up a restaurant on a professional scale and investing all that money at a later point, and not having that sunk cost. So a lot of data science kind of should proceed along these lines. So think about the dish and the insight, the thing that you'll be consuming as the organization first, and then think about the supply chain and all the other ingredients that need to go into it in order to get to that insight. And I think that type of mentality will really aid you and save you a lot of money down the road. And some organizations might say, well, we don't really have that much data. I mean, we report some to our grant funding agencies once in a while, but we really don't have that much data. Well, there are obviously the data sources that you're already collecting. If you have those, that's great. You should probably dig in and to see if there's log data. If you have a website and you have a user community that's online, you probably have very detailed, rich data about how many people log in at a given time, at what times during the day, and use that to augment what you already know about the people in terms of their attributes. But then you also have less obvious data sources. Sometimes you have data that just exhausts out that you could be capturing, that could be of value if you have a specific question that you're trying to answer. For instance, are we increasing engagement of our donors or members as soon as they join? Like, what's the general profile? When do they start dropping off? And then revisit that and see if you can capture it either through surveys or other tools that you layer in on existing systems. And sometimes you're collecting something over long periods of time, but because server constraints, you're just throwing them away. Log rotation is a very classic example. You might collect access data on your web server logs, but because the log rotation is set up to only keep 10 logs of certain size and then delete the other ones, you are continuously losing data that you could be easily archiving. But then I also want to caution about collecting everything. I think there's we don't want to be in the habit of becoming pack rats or hoarders, where we just don't know what the importance of data is, and as a result just collect everything. I think that adds more pain in the long term than the other more judicious approach. And if you store less data, you also expose yourself to less risk in the case of a security breach, which is very important nowadays, an important security consideration overall before you start on a large data project. So what are some of the pathways to data analysis? We saw all the obstacles. Now let's dig into what we can do in order to make that happen. So the place where we want to end up is master data management. And master data management is not just technology, but it's also people, policies, guidelines, and sort of the connective tissue that combines all of those pieces in order for us as an organization to have a very unified view of all of the things that that organization is doing. Now, this is a very idealized scenario, and as an idealized scenario, it's generally very, very expensive or hard to get to this place in a short amount of time. But this is what we're striving towards. If we were to use a top-down approach to get to a master data management plan, we could think of this as like a classical consulting implementation project. We would probably use waterfall, analyze all the existing data stores, all the business processes that go into it, put together a multi-year project, do about 8 months to a year full requirements gathering, and then at the end of it, probably the project will fail, especially at a nonprofit or NGO. That's because it takes a very long time, which tends to translate to high cost. It's really hard over the course of a year to gain enough support within the organization to deliver high value, and so people are going to be skeptical, and if people are skeptical in your organization, it's really hard for you to affect change and change practices. Because they won't see the results for another 2 years. Project scope creep will set in inevitably, so the project will never be finished because there's always something else that gets online during the time that the project is being deployed. The lack of governance around data and the lack of sort of strategic discipline when it comes to implementing new systems will lead to new things being broken open at all given times, and then that leads to scope creep as well. The basic tenet is that, we need to have a full master data management framework. It needs to be implemented before we can actually gain insights from it, and so as a result, insights never make it out. And the MDM first approach really leads to too many choices. There's it throws up too many hows, and as a result, we don't ever get to the insights. where it's extremely hard. So let's look at how we can flip this model of data as the new oil and think of it a slightly different way. So there's a brilliant quote by David McCandles, who is a pioneer in data visualization. If you haven't checked out his work, I highly recommend you do. He claims that data is actually the new soil. And soil is a different metaphor, and I think the more befitting one for nonprofits to use. It takes a lot of work. It requires tilling and cultivation. It presupposes a certain sense of stewardship. You own the land that you're working on. It's yours. You are in charge of it. You're doing this for the long haul. It's not just some boon where oil spouts from your land and then you become rich all of a sudden. No, it's a very gradual process. But then the fruits of the labor are actually things that sustain you in the long term. It's a very bottom-up organic view of how to deal with data, and I think I would encourage you to think about building pipelines more in this sense. So as you can tell, if you had the means to start an industrial agricultural farm, obviously you could buy GMO seeds and plant mass rows of corn and get started on an industrial scale with the heavy machinery that you need. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a realization that comes over time that sort of investments need to grow as the operation is growing. So how does data analysis from the bottom up look like? Well, we want to use a more agile model, so that means an iterative process. We want to think about incrementally taking our data and making it better over time. So at any given point, we actually can use whatever we have, even if it's just a limited angle on our data, to be able to make insights and actionable insights out of them. So you want to go for the lowest hanging fruit first, which means that over time you get a lot of wins within the organization in terms of alignment. If you can show that data is useful and can be utilized to improve operations, then you galvanize the entire organizational structure to actually support those efforts, rather than having them wait with bated breath for a large project to finish. So this is a huge win, especially at a nonprofit or NGO. You grow support within the organization because at each step you are layering in more refinement, and you need to then talk to different departments. They become involved, and you can put their data online into the MDMS as the system grows. So the perceived value across all your departments will increase. And the assumption is the work is always work in progress. So MDM is always work in progress. There's never a finish line, but that's okay because we're going to approach it in an agile fashion. Insights steadily improve, and that's because the refinement pipelines will get better over time. The governance structures that deal with data cleanliness and entity resolution will improve as well. The people involved in your organization from data intake to data administration will know why it's important, because now there's an insight that top management wants to gain from this, and some of those insights have already made it into improving the operations. So there's this virtuous cycle where data and insights feeds back into better actions. And the eventual MDM approach is actually extremely powerful because it allows for analytical capabilities at an early stage, and it gets better over time, which also means that your organization that's harvesting or tapping this resource becomes more sophisticated about what they can do with the system, because it's a learning process for them on an organizational side just as much as it is a technological problem on consolidating all the data. So here's a very classic data architecture and best practice that I want to have you walk away with today. Data lakes are one. I'm not going to cover a lot about data lakes, but the idea is very, very similar to this. The idea is to take your disparate data sources, like a donor database, events database, ticketing system, the website, online-facing user community, for instance, your CRM that manages all of your contacts, potentially also, integrates case management into it, as well as program data of, say, field offices that contribute metrics upstream. If we wanted to operationalize this, we would, in this golden record scenario, spin up another database. This could be a MongoDB store or unstructured data source like Elasticsearch, or it could also be just another CRM implementation that just happens to be shielded from the other implementations but has a really strong API layer so that other systems can easily talk to it. We would then build pipelines, start with the one that is the easiest, the lowest hanging fruit, say the CMS data goes into the golden record and then gets reconciled with the CRM data. If that's not already the case, then this is a very typical starting point for these types of integrations. You would run the necessary dedupe and record linkage to make sure that you don't duplicate contacts across those two databases, and then incrementally layer in the right cleansing so that the golden record actually becomes better over time. And once this sort of pipeline has been set up, you can start asking questions to data and start with a why. Well, why do our users that engage on the website tend to give more or have higher click-through rates and CRM mailings that we send out? And those, or do they, right? And given those types of questions, you can then start playing with the data that's in the golden record. And granted, this is not the complete view of your entire organization, but it lets you start playing with scenarios in that context. And then as your capabilities and your budget allows, you can then start integrating the other pieces of data using these incremental ETLs. And over time, you will eventually gain an MDM structure. And basically, this whole system then turns out to be your MDM, Master Data Management. Here are some open source tools that we really like, that are almost best of breed to build data pipelines. I'll add web links to these slides after the talk, so you don't have to Google these individually, and you can just click on them. The Open Data Kit is an incredibly ambitious but also successful project that allows you to collect mobile, Android-based tablet or phone data as surveys that then feeds into a Google App Engine backend. And it literally, based on a spreadsheet that you create, does the code generation to create the app for you that then allows you to collect data in very remote places. So one of the application areas is to allow for collection in offline scenarios in like sub-Saharan Africa or remote locations where you don't have standing internet connection, for people to go into local hospitals and libraries, do an inventory. But then when they're within reach of a Wi-Fi network, being able to sync that data up to a central data collection instance, in this case Google App Engine, and have that data feedback into that inventory, master inventory. It's a project that's developed at the University of Washington. It's extremely good at what it does, and it's considered most nonprofits actually don't know about it. They'll happily embark on a custom Ruby on Rails build for pretty much the same thing, and don't even know that this is out there. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at that. Some people still build websites by hand, ad hoc, but that sort of negates the whole power of community when it comes to open source. Drupal is an excellent example of leveraging community. There are thousands of nonprofits using Drupal as their public-facing site. There are literally thousands of modules in the Drupal ecosystem that allow you to do all kinds of different integrations out of the box just by integrating contrib modules in your existing site. If you don't know about Drupal, you should definitely take a look. CiviCRM is an open source solution for the CRM problem, and it's an excellent solution that has a really strong API layer that allows you to handle CRM data very flexibly and over time. It has really large-scale deployments all over the world. There's about 5,000 to 8,000 nonprofits that are using this day to day. Pentao data integration is a tool that's used for open source ETL work. So ETL, if you're not familiar with the acronym, is extract, transform, and load. It's the magic that happens between one data store and mangling the data and wrangling it into another data store. It has a very visual programming interface, and it handles streaming data like a champ. It's built on Java, so you can multi-thread different bottleneck steps, and it will round robin distribute the data and then combine it after that step as well. So it's extremely useful, powerful. We at my company, Infanos, use Pentao data integration every day, basically. For small enough Excel spreadsheets and tabular data, OpenRefine is an excellent data cleansing tool that is also not getting a lot of press coverage, but is free. Highly encourage you to take a look at that. It's think of it as a spreadsheet on steroids that installs on your laptop, and you can get started with it within minutes of installing it, in fact. Like, there are 3 YouTube tutorials online that you can watch to get started. Python dedupe library is an open source library made by some friends of ours here in Chicago at DataMate, and it allows for large-scale deduping to happen in an open source way. It's extremely efficient at what it does, and the guys at DataMate are awesome, so if you have any questions, contact them. It's also hosted on GitHub, so you can download the code and play with it. Kneme Analytics Platform is an open source data streaming and analysis framework, very similar to Pentao, but geared towards machine learning and predictive analytics. If you haven't seen it already, take a look. It's very simple to set up. Has great auto-update functionality. A lot of these packages in the analytics space get updated and bug fixed almost daily. And so it's really good at updating all the dependencies and packages all within one bundle and a very intuitive user interface. And if you've done analytics using Weka and or R and want to do some back data validation, model validation, and things like that, Kneme is a very powerful tool. Also written in Java, also cross-platform. And then there are a set of packages that you can cobble together to create your own sort of Python analytics stack. Very powerful interactive shell called IPython that, combined with pandas and scikit-learn, basically gives you a whole machine learning pipeline. There's R, which is a statistical language that's based on S. That's pretty much the lingua franca of computational analysis in the statistics world. Most statisticians actually publish R packages as part of their research, and then it's available to the public. For visualization, there's an incredibly powerful high-level library called dc.js. It's dimensional charting visualizations, utilizes all the power of D3, which you might have heard of. It's a JavaScript library for data visualization, and cross-filter, which is something that the guys at Square Up, or I guess Square, the payment company, came up with. And it allows you to slice and dice your data, which you just supply as a JSON in the browser without any flash or not a lot of programming. So it's extremely powerful in that regard. And lightweight, because it doesn't make any queries to your database. Once the JSON data is loaded, you can slice and dice it whichever way you want. And then there are storage and backends that are extremely powerful. I can't mention all of them, but Elasticsearch has a beautiful REST interface. It allows you to store contact records in an unstructured document type fashion. It's blazing fast for search. So if you wanted to scaffold a data system where you want to be schemaless in the NoSQL way, Elasticsearch is a fantastic solution for that. MongoDB is something very similar. Neo4j is a graph database, so if you have questions about your data that are highly connected and looking at social graphs, Neo4j has a lot of built-in power. It's also open source. Hadoop, everybody has heard about. Nonprofits are not really utilizing that at the moment, but because they don't really have big data, or most of them don't. And Spark is an analytics sort of streaming data processing piece that is quickly replacing Hadoop for machine learning tasks in big data in the big data space. And PostgreSQL and PostGIS, which I haven't put on the slide, but for geographical queries, those two are de facto best of breed right now for the open source market. So how would this look like if we were to re-envision the master data management system that we talked about in sort of an open source way? Well, a lot of nonprofits use Razor's Edge and or some other database for their donors, so that can be integrated into the Golden Record. Ticketing database could then also be integrated into the Golden Record, and here we just chose CiviCRM as just the middle point, but we could have, if we had more development resources in-house, that's software development resources, not fundraising development resources, then we could probably have come up with a custom solution with Elasticsearch in the middle as the Golden Record layer. But we get a lot of bang for our buck using CiviCRM. It has a very strong built-in REST API. It talks really beautifully to all the other systems that are currently mentioned on this slide. And it's free to use, and it scales really well up to tens of millions of records. So why not use it? It has a lot of has a very slick user interface where you can drill down to context very quickly. Things that you don't need to build if you were to do this custom, which gets you to a usable system a lot faster than if you had to cobble something together from parts. So I think the distinction that I want to make that's very important is that CiviCRM on the bottom is the gray instance, is the operational data store. So this could be the email marketing combined with the online donations, combined with some events management. If those components are used, those are all components that are built in within CiviCRM. But then that data gets fed in and combined with all the other data sources in the Golden Record, which it is a separate instance of CiviCRM in this case that is not publicly accessible. So this is just for the organization itself. It can be cordoned off and put behind firewalls with security policies, two-factor authorization, everything that you want with a very valuable, extremely sensitive data store that combines all of your mission-critical data, so that you don't have bleeding of high-value data into other operational stores, but you also have a pathway up to this new instance. So you would just start a new instance of CiviCRM and then use Pentaho for the incremental ETLs, to do the cleaning, and as you put more of the other data stores online and connect them up with the golden record, your analytics capabilities increase. In this example, we're using the Python dedupe library for record linking. And then when you have a golden database, golden record database, then it's possible for you to start thinking about analysis that you want to do, run a few visualizations, and apply some machine learning. And for those, you can use Python or Knime, because now you have one data source that combines all of the other ones. So thank you. That concludes my talk. If you have any questions, let me know. I think we have 10 more minutes.
Well, that was a great session. Thank you, Youngjin, for sharing this insightful information about the data infrastructure architecture that enables data analysis for nonprofits and the organizations. I'm pretty sure that our audience will try out the open source tools that you recommended and will surely benefit from, leveraging these tools. Moving on, I'm sure you guys have some questions, so please press the raise hand button on your control panel if you want to ask your question using your microphone, or you can type your questions in the chat box on your screen. You can also take this conversation live by tweeting using the hashtag SrijanWW and tagging our Twitter handle @Srijan. So since we're already short on time here, I'll take up our first question quickly. You have so much experience with managing data and data analysis. So if you were to recommend a tool for small nonprofits that is essentially budget friendly, but at the same time it gets the job done, what would it be?
So are you referring to just the analysis portion of things, assuming that data is already clean and sort of consolidated?
Yes, I believe it's just for the data analysis part.
That's a tough question, partly because even if a nonprofit has the data ready, they might not, especially if they're smaller, on the smaller side, they don't have the internal capabilities of somebody who is trained as a data scientist or an analyst. So for those types of organizations, they generally know how to run aggregate statistics and reports. If they need extra help, there are some great organizations all across the U.S. that can connect them with volunteer data scientists that could help them make sense of their data or ask the right questions about it. One organization that comes to mind that's very active all across the United States and worldwide actually is DataKind. They have a volunteer data core of dedicated data scientists that want to help nonprofits, so I would highly encourage you to contact them directly. There are other smaller efforts, very localized efforts. For instance, there's a group in Chicago called Open Government Hack Night that tries to do this sort of on the Chicago scale. And if you've never been to one of these hack nights, I highly encourage you to check it out. Data Potluck, which is an effort that I started in Chicago, tries to do the same thing. As a tool, I would, depending on the size of your data, I would probably just start with OpenRefine. OpenRefine does an incredible job of being able to explore the data very, very quickly in a simple user interface. You can't run very complex queries unless you have it in a table format, which is a little limiting, but that's where I would start. There unfortunately is no like Tableau explore the data, drill down, run some analysis and visualize all in one package out there yet. That can get the job done, but that's an excellent question.
Okay, thank you so much.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I hope so too. So if you have any follow-up question, please feel free to type in. Our next question is that have you also worked with any proprietary tools for data analysis? And if yes, what were those and how has your experience been like?
So we are a company that's sort of founded on, Emphanos is founded on this open source ethos. We really think that's the future of software in general. So I have worked with Tableau, which is a proprietary piece of software. There's also TIBCO Spotfire, which is very similar to Tableau, that allows you to do graphing. And I think they now started giving out, at least for the cloud version, a nonprofit free trial or perpetual license if you apply for it. Those tools are extremely powerful. Like I said, there's no equivalent in the open source world yet, but also it's not necessarily the end all of data analysis. So if you have a little bit of elbow grease and are handy with programming, all of the equivalent pieces in the Python world, in that stack that I mentioned, the IPython, Panda, scikit-learn stack, and matplotlib as part of it for visualization are existing and could be used for leveraging data analysis. While there are many very expensive offerings in the proprietary world, we at Emphanos don't use them because we don't find that, number one, they're either cost-effective to our client, or number two, we feel open source is in 10 years going to dominate this field anyway, so why not learn the tools now rather than paying a hefty software license fee up front.
Very fair points, Hyunjin, and thank you so much for sharing your experience. Since we are running towards the end of the webinar, I would request those who still have questions to please mail them at webinars@srijan.in. Thank you once again, Hyunjin, for such a knowledgeable session. We are sure everyone found your presentation very interesting and insightful. And a big thank you to all the attendees for joining us today. I would also like to announce that our next webinar, titled Drupal 8 Front End for Backenders, is focused on the goodies from Twig that are now possible in Drupal 8 and how do you get started with it. This webinar would be hosted on the 1st of April by Laurie Escola. Laurie is Drupal craftsman at Druid, Finland. He is also an active member of the Drupal community and has been working with Drupal development and theming since 2010. For registrations and more details, you would be getting a mail from our site. So stay tuned, and thank you once again for joining us today.
Thank you, Priyanka, for organizing. Bye.